Ago.
Amen.
Ago.
Amen.
Ago.
Amen.
On behalf of the Institute of African Studies, I'd like to warmly welcome you to our 4th annual Black History Month Film Festival. And today we have 3 very exciting films. The first film is entitled, what's our first film, Niall? Very good. This is why I keep none of y'all around. Our very first film is Colors of the Alphabet, and it's dealing with the language in which students learn in. Our second film, Burkinabe Rising, the Art of Resistance in Burkina Faso. It deals with the burgeoning art scene, dance scene, people doing hip hop, things of that nature in Burkina Faso. And then finally we have The Voice of the Kora, which is the instrument, the Kora, and new innovations that are coming about in order to really revitalize it in the music of the world. So with no further ado, because we have the 3 films and then we want to have a short discussion after, people will continue to comment, I'm sure, but I'd like to thank those of you who have come. Thank Fidelia for bringing the light. Thank those of you who have come on time, and we don't want to penalize you, so let's go ahead and get started. I see I'm on double duty today. My graduate assistant has perhaps taken a bit of a break. I'd like to thank all of you who came out for the very first day. Everyone has a responsibility to bring 5 people on your back for tomorrow's program, or on your front, however you decide. But I want to open up the floor to any thoughts, ideas, questions. I see some were here from the very beginning. We saw the first film on Colors of the Alphabet. Then we went, and that was basically taking place in Zambia, about children learning in their own language and in other languages, and the whole situation there. Then we saw Burkinabe Rising, about the revolution in Burkina, and various types of revolutions, artistic revolutions. And then finally, Voice of the Kora. So I want to open it up for anyone, any reactions, thoughts, questions, ideas that came up from the films. You're looking like I didn't know I would be put on the spot.
About the first documentary, I liked it. I found it quite interesting, especially that there's no narration. So the directors, producers left it to the viewer to make their own conclusions and decide for themselves what the story, the narrative of the documentary was. And what I took away from it was the teacher was obviously, she was trying her best. Obviously, I think she commented that she's from the city and she's out there, so I don't know if that's the only job she could get or if she genuinely was out there to help and contribute to those living in the rural side. But my issue I had with her is the same issue. My mum has a small school down the road in La, and her teachers are the same as this woman was, to the extent of telling children or teaching children without giving them reasons. So actually, funny enough, the thing that they repeated and they finished with it with her saying, "Why are you late?" is the same. I've had that conversation with the teachers at my mum's school. They'll tell children not to be late, but they won't tell the children why not to be late. And so I've actually asked teachers, why is it not good, who themselves are often late as well, why is it not good to be late? What would you tell the children should be the reason not to be late? And yeah, they struggle with it. And so if they struggle with it, then of course teaching the children is going to be an issue. So, you know, I've kind of talked them through it. It's about the cause and effect. If the child is late, it means they've missed out on things. You introducing the child to what they've missed then takes time away from the students who have been there. If you add it all up, maybe by the end of the term, there's 2 days of learning that has been missed. If the child got a B or a C, maybe they would have got an A, all this kind of thing. So expanding it across her whole curriculum, it would then be about, and specifically what the documentary was about, language. It would be ideal if overnight all our politicians got the truth of it and made sure that we were learning in our local languages, but for now, we're not there. But what we can at least do is expand what we are working with, so give reasons. So with the example of the lateness, give reasons for it, sort of expand what we're working with, so let the children understand that there's reasons for things. So even though we can't take it to the next level where we're thinking on a Pan-Africanist level and taking pride in our own language and our own culture, at least with the little that we are working with, at least give reasons, expand it so that the children have at least, although it's basic, children have at least a 360-degree view of that basicness, if you know what I mean. So that's what I took away from that. And I liked what they did with the second documentary, because it's pretty much what I'm trying to say with this, is that those women and men weren't doing anything extraordinary. They were still working in their small areas, but they were thinking in revolutionary terms. So they're cleaning things, they're selling fruit and vegetables and things, but they see themselves in the greater picture of what Burkina Faso was and could become with their contribution. So it's that sort of thing that I'm talking about. That yes, we need to be working to a point when we are truly revolutionary in everything, politically, economically, but in the meantime, let's at least, in our small spaces, think, if not revolutionary, but at least innovatively, and know that we're part of something and we have a cause and effect, and how we think, what we do has an effect on the next person, and that kind of positive sort of domino effect.
Very good, just what I was looking for. Anyone else, any thoughts, contributions, ideas, questions?
Okay, I would like to say that with the first documentary, it looks like trying to have a whole education in our languages looks like a very, very long way and a huge thing to do. I don't think with the things that we are learning in school, you can teach everything in our languages. With, for instance, a guy was asking, there was a man in the documentary who was asking how he's going to translate fallopian tube in his language. But the little things, we can only let our languages have impact in our lives from the house, from the home. Because in school, you are learning about science, you're learning about maths. How do you translate these things in our languages? It looks like a big thing to do, but in our homes, right from starting with our children, our families and all that, we can make a very great impact using our own language. Because a child would be more acquainted with his language if it's spoken at home. And then also if the things that are learnt in school are made practical in our setting. Because I keep saying that you tell me to eat balanced diets, you tell me to eat healthy. I'm from the Family and Consumer Science department, so I'm going to use food. So you told me to eat a balanced diet. You're telling me about spinach, celery and all that. Not everybody knows that. What happened to our contombe? What happened to the things that we know in our environment, in our society? So to me, I think the whole changing and teaching everything in our language is going to be a bit difficult and very far-fetched. But the best we can do is to try and then make everything we teach in school, everything we talk about, everything we do in our settings, and also try and then use our languages at home. Because if the family or the house doesn't socialize the children in our culture and in our language, it's going to be difficult for the official institutions to do.
Yes, the teacher was speaking, what was the orange language called?
Chinyanja. Nyanja.
Nyanja. So it looked like she was speaking Nyanja and using Nyanja to teach English, and though the children spoke solely at home. So that was curious. But what came out for me really was, I don't know, somehow it was like the children's story, kind of like what they were going through, and somehow that sort of rose to the surface for me. So yes, there was the teacher, but it was almost the way the footage was done, it was like the teacher through the children's eyes. You felt their shyness, you felt their reticence, you felt their trying to take it all in and learn and listen to what she was telling them, though they spoke solely, and she's teaching them these English terms and concepts, and and then they have their own little issues going on with each other, and it was like their whole little world, and somehow that was sort of what became prominent for me. And I was surprised that's what I connected with. That's what became the dominant narrative, was their journey and their story. And even though the one boy, I want to say his name was Stephen. Stewart, thank you, Stewart. He was there in a few scenes, and his father was talking and explaining things, but you can still feel Stewart. It was like Stewart was like the prominent one, even though his father was saying he's the most humblest boy I've ever seen, and his mother's like, oh yes, and he's always helping with the hurting and this, that, and the other. And I mean, he was just so there, and it was just so, I don't know if it was intentional or if I'm just in a space where that just kind of touched me that way. And similarly, in the second movie in Burkina Faso, there was this really impassioned African consciousness, solidarity, let's come together, let's be free, let's liberate ourselves message. And it wasn't really about, let's bling out, let's build the tallest skyscraper, let's have the biggest flat screen TV and the most pimped out Hummer. It was just people really trying to connect on a really human level and do something meaningful and something magical. So here again, their narrative kind of came out, their story came out, and the elegant simplicity of it. And then somehow that reverberated again in the third one with the instrument, because here, they're making this instrument, and it's almost like a birth where they're shoving these sticks through the skin, and it's like, wow. At one point I even said out loud, wow. But it's all for the sake of creating this instrument from this huge gourd that's making this phenomenal sound, and they're just into that. They're into the simplicity of that. So there again is this theme of the elegance of just being us. And I found myself with the children kind of saying, but what would happen if they just went ahead and just did their thing? Why would that be like a crime against humanity? What if they didn't become an airline pilot? And what if they didn't become a high-powered attorney? And what if they didn't become a physician? Would that be like a bad thing? And what if they kind of like didn't end up really learning English? And is that now the world is going to end because English wasn't learned? And if that's the attitude, then what does that say about the rest of us, the type of import that we put on English? Not all the other thousands of languages, but just English. And it just kind of had me going, wow, this is really getting inverted. So, but I don't know how you select this. I don't know if you intentionally like fasted and stuff, and or if you threw the dice,
meditated,
or you did something alphabetical or something, or went on a 30-day urine fast. I don't know. But the way that those three movies came together for me was just I don't know, it was just really powerful, and they just sort of fit together like a puzzle piece, even though they were totally about different things. Yeah.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, I actually wanted to speak to one of the points that was made. Oh, yeah. And we've been joined by the Honorable, Praiseworthy, and Illustrious Obinfo. Obinfo Jr. I actually did a talk, so I'm a linguist by training, and I actually did a talk on Twi neologisms, Twi Averfosim. And I went through some of the things that I'm working on now. One is the periodic table of elements in Twi, along with an author, Asim Kwesi Boadi, who has a Twi dictionary, where he already has a lot of these scientific terms. But I was looking at things like, things that seem very complex, something like hydrogen. But if you look at the word hydro, just means water, and then gen just means to generate, right? So I was looking at words that already exist in the Twi language, and one of the words for the Supreme Being, Onyame, is Amusu, the one who gives, or Ma Usu, Amusu. So, we were going back and forth about ideas. If you look at words like helium, right, it's coming from helios, which just means the sun. So there's another word for the Supreme Being, Amuya. So looking at pre-existing words, because the reason why some of these terms and concepts seem so advanced and difficult is because we don't actually understand them. We just look at the thing and say, this is the name of it, how could I possibly come up with a name? But if we actually understood what we were saying, then things would become much easier. So, this is the principle that we're working on. And also to put things in perspective, that it wasn't very long ago that it would seem absurd to teach anything in English. English is not a language of learning at this period in time. Latin is a language of learning, secondarily French. English is a language of people who herd cows. So when you say Oxford, you're saying this is the ford in the river where you herd oxen, right? When you're talking about these things, so we say, oh, Oxford. It's like, what are you even talking about? If you look at how even the language is structured, that the indigenous English words are the words that are for herders and things like that. So if I say cow, that's the English word. But once it comes onto the plate of the high, noble, French colonizers, you say boeuf, it's beef, you understand? Same thing, if I say sheep, mutton, and we can go across the whole thing. But basically just to put things in perspective, that for those of us who may not be steeped in that history, we see English where it is now, and we, kind of assume like it's always been that way. But again, not too long ago, it was seen absurd to be able to teach anything in English. English is not a language of learning, it's a language of, just the lowest rung of humanity, if you even want to call it that. So just saying that to say we can take some inspiration from that, because if we look at our languages, the words that exist for flora, for fauna, for so forth and so on, and now adapting those words that are already in the language to explain things that are there. If we're talking about carbon, we already have Jabidie, you understand? So we can use these terms, but I did a talk on that, and I actually give examples of when you're saying proton, you're just saying first, right? So don't we have the word akan? So, in some cases I was saying, let's look at that word and then adapt it. In other cases, looking at entirely different words, because if you say Mercury, that Mercury, you're talking about Greek and Roman adaptations of the word for Jehuti, which was an indigenous African divinity. So why can't we call this thing that you're calling Mercury, why can't we refer to it as Jehuti? Because that was the original term that they just co-opted in order to call it Mercury. So just to put that, into our heads. And check out the that talk online, because I think you will find it very interesting from a linguistic perspective. Any other thoughts, reactions, ideas, questions?
I don't agree. Yeah, going to what the lady with the short hair said, definitely that's another point I thought of, about being practical. Especially the woman in the first documentary. And it was sad to me, going to what you said, Dr. Kambon, that, and you, sister, that the parents of these children were aspiring for them to go and get a job in an office. And I don't know anything about agriculture or anything like that, but I'm scared to think of the natural resources that they're sitting on there. And no doubt there's some multinational that is waiting for the numbers to dwindle enough and move in and clear the rest out and take whatever is there. No doubt there's going to be herbs and cures for things in amongst the stuff that they're farming and things. And so one thing the teacher could have done, once again, dealing with what she's got, nothing too extraordinary, using the children's environments to teach them. You know, she's teaching head, shoulders, knees and toes. And it's not even abstract, it's like it's absurd, the devices she's using, instead of using what the children know and their environments, or get them thinking practically that when they go home today, they're going to look at their space in a different kind of way. Okay, how can I fix this problem? What do I think is a problem that isn't a problem? Or this sort of thing. So once again, I think, and they also alluded to the fact that her numbers were dropping. At one point, I don't know, I think there were different classes, but at one point there was like 40 people in the class, and then towards the end, the numbers had dropped significantly, and then she had a couple of conversations with children saying, why are you not coming? And that's, of course, because it's irrelevant to them. One, there's the language difficulty, and two, you're teaching us things that we can't and don't want to conceptualize of. So once again, if she had dealt with their environment and used 1 tree, 2 tree, 3 tree to teach them, that got them. And I don't know if that was in my head, but when she was talking about money, I felt like that's when the children were most responsive. I don't know if that was in my head when she was talking about what is 10 to, I felt like there was more feedback from the class, like, yeah, this we know about, yeah, when our parents send us with the money, this is what the money adds up to, and all this sort of thing. So that's sad, but it's realistic, it's a real situation that, yes, we understand money, we deal with it every day. So that was symbolic of what she could have been doing. Instead of it being about the money, it could have been about the farms that they help their parents with every day. And like, she's talking about holidays, and he didn't go on a holiday, he went to work. You know, I mean, she's using that term holiday. The two things are not computing. And yeah, that also reminds me of what you were saying. I'm scripting a comedy series that I want to be all in Ghana, like no English at all. And yes, to an extent it's difficult, but really the actual only difficulty is whether people will recognize the words we're going to be using. Because yeah, I've come to that conclusion that you were pointing out, that there's no tremendous words really that we use in English that are so special, but there's this sort of inevitability to English that people say, okay, there's a new invention, we have to find a word for it, somebody shouts out what the word is, and then it becomes English, whichever the root is, whether it's Latin, whether it's German, whether it's French, whether it's from an Indian colony, whether it's somewhere from Africa, it becomes English. And because of colonization and our languages being sort of frozen in time from that point and not being used practically, we now think of our language ourselves as something that needs to be preserved, an antique that you take down and polish and use in very specific rites and things, but then when you actually need to speak practically, you move to whatever colonial language you're surrounded by. And yes, I've discovered that so many words are just combinations of things. Internet, we think is a bit, you know, usually one of the first things that people criticize in Ghana and Chi is like, how are you going to get a word for internet and computer? But once again, computer is just a word for think. Compute, calculate. So what's our word for think? What's our word for nets? We have nets, we fish, so we have the words that they use. Inter is just that interconnected thing, and the net. So the words are there, but whether we will recognize those words in our own language as what I'm trying to transmit through this comedy series, that's the only issue. But yeah, that made me think as well.
I have to say that the overall, you know, as I'm listening to you, and then Doc, as I'm listening to you, and I'm wondering what % of the English language has other words infused into it.
It's like 80.
It's a pan-Eurasian language.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. But the overall impact, honestly, of those 3 films were, especially the first and the third film, we're doing good, we're cool. At moments I thought, man, I'd like to kind of go and live in that village. That's looking kind of laid back. That's looking kind of fun. You know, I really did. I'm like, is it me, or is that kind of like chillaxing on a major level? And the children didn't look sickly. And at one point, Stuart's sister wasn't feeling well, but they didn't say what was wrong with her, and maybe she had a headache, I don't know, you know, or something. But it was the overall theme for me is we're doing fine, and then stuff kind of gets imposed on us, and maybe we kind of go with it, maybe we don't. But if you know, when the movie's over, I could imagine myself. I can imagine the children kind of saying, okay, now where were we before we were so rudely interrupted, you know? And then they just go on. But that's, you know, that's for, and the same with the third movie. You know, we're here, we're making these fly-ass instruments. They're off the hook. They sound completely glorious. And we get around and we drink palm wine and we play them and we sing and we're cool and we're good. And then someone comes along and says, yes, but you should make it like this, and you should do it like that. And I'm gonna make it, but I'm not gonna call it the Cora, but it's kind of like the Cora, and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, dude, knock yourself out. But we're here chilling, you know, with the real thing, doing it our way, and, you know, do you. But, you know, we're good. And that's the overall theme, honestly, that came to me. You know, I'm not disagreeing with what, you know, everyone is saying. And Doc, I would like to know, you know, what percent of that language is infused with, you know, bits and pieces of wording from other, and concepts and constructs from other languages. But all said and done, that's really how that impacted me. I mean, when you looked at these children, they didn't look like, you know, they was being abused and molested and suffering. And, you know, I mean, there was one scene where there was a fly on Stuart's nose, and I was like, Stuart, get the fly away. You know, but other than that, I felt all right. You know, it looked like it was all right to me.
Stuart was chilling with that fly.
Stuart was chilling with the fly.
In the first documentary, The Colors of the Alphabet, the teacher, there was a female student who insulted one of the classmates, and then the teacher is like, what church do you attend? I had a very, very big problem there. Why do you ask the kid what church she attends the moment she insults someone? They make it look like the churches or religion is the only way we can have
Good
morals to be
behavior.
human enough. And it goes on in our schools, in our classrooms, everywhere. We tend to associate everything with religion, especially Christianity. And not even some way, somehow, it is really the biggest of our problems. Just simply tell the child it's not good to insult someone else, it's not human enough, it's not blah blah blah, and then we are asking the child what church she attends. Then also, I think Elizabeth's father made a statement that Soli has a very rich culture, and that it's never going to disappear, and it's going to remain in future.
And that is growing.
And that is growing. And it looks like they have taught the children the ways, the traditions, the culture, what it is like. That most of us who don't even know our hometowns, we don't even know where we come from, we don't know our languages, we don't know anything about our backgrounds, and it's very sad. And someone was like, as long as she knows her language, but let me just say, as long as you know your culture, you will never forget where you come from. And it was from the first documentary. So I think we should all try to know our backgrounds, know our roots, know where we come from. It's going to help us a lot.
Anyone else? We got some shy people here. But one thing I was thinking about in the first film is that you saw all these wide open spaces. And I said, what happened to the overpopulation in Africa that we have?
You know?
Because anytime I go anywhere, if I'm driving to Kumasi, there's open spaces as far as the eye can see. Volta region, anywhere you go in Africa, open spaces. And I was just thinking, where is the overpopulation?
Planned Parenthood.
The Planned Parenthood, you know, we showed the documentary Maafa 21 that over 20 million babies have been aborted in the U.S., black babies have been aborted in the U.S., which is more than all of the lynchings from the 1800s to the early 1900s, and all of the police brutality shootings from 2000 up to around 2015, where the stats go up to. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that came out is that over the course of 3 days, you get more than all of the lynchings put together. However, we have the billboards from Maurice Stopes International, Planned Parenthood, eugenics, and things of that nature. That was one thing that came up. Another thing, just in terms of the language piece, is that some of you know I teach my children in African languages. Matter of fact, I don't speak to them in anything but African languages. I've never spoken a word to them in anything but African languages. And like as I was learning Twi, I started learning all the African languages I know as an adult. And as I was learning them, initially I was thinking about how I would have gotten a head start if I would have learned them as a child. But then, you know, I came to the point of when I see other people who have the view that, oh, my language is primitive, is not developed, I can't do things, I didn't approach the Twi language as though it couldn't do anything. So, you know, at the School of Languages conference, someone asked a whole room full of 500 linguists, who even knows the word for brown and Twi? And I was the only one who raised my hand. Because I looked in the dictionary, what else would I do? But I didn't have the preconceived notion that this language isn't capable of doing things, so therefore I went and learned what the words for all of these things were. So it's sort of like the paradox of, you know, how do you approach our languages? So whether it's Nyanja, whether it's Soli, whether it's Bemba, whatever, that if we have this view that we invented mathematics, how many people are aware that African people invented mathematics? 1, 2, 3, 2.5, 3, 4, okay. That the oldest mathematical instrument in the history of the world dates back to 40,000 years ago, and it was found here in Africa. And it's the fibula of a baboon. The second oldest mathematical instrument dates around 22,000 years. So Limbombo and then Ishambu. And that's also the fibula of a baboon. And it also goes into why the first mathematicians were most likely women, because what you see on it are prime numbers, you see multiplication, division, and it's thought to be both of these tools to calculate the menstrual cycle, to see when they would be able to give birth and all of these types of things. So if we invented mathematics, and the reason why it's a baboon is because the baboon howls at the moon. So the people who are inventing mathematics are letting you know it's not just happenstance. I'm showing you that I understand that there's a correlation between my menstrual cycle and mathematics and the moon. And so nature. Even when you're saying, and nature, so even when you're saying menstrual menses, you're talking about the moon, you understand? So all of these things are quite profound concepts. If you go to ancient Kemet, that's what they now call ancient Egypt, the land of black people, that they also represented Jehuti, what I mentioned before, the divinity of the moon, also the divinity of mathematics and science and writing, so forth and so on. They represented that divinity as a baboon. You understand? So this is an idea that didn't start in Kemet, which was founded around 5,000 plus years. This is an idea that goes back at least 40,000 years and before, right? So these are the things that if we grew up knowing them, we would have a vastly different concept of what we are and who we are. We invented science. And it's not necessary to make up any of this. You can just go to the documentation, but the documentation isn't part of our curriculum. So you have to wait to get to university and wait for Dr. Kambam to come and stand in front of you to learn things that everyone should have learned from childhood. But these are the things that my own children get. We have an African-centered homeschool. These are the things that the other children get. Because just like you're saying, if you're learning the things that are in your environment, it can perhaps take you much further.
I'm not nowhere close to a linguist, but I love learning languages. And even though I remember having a difficult time having someone teach me a couple of years ago how to say brown in Twi. When you said that, it brought back that memory. I was trying to learn how to say green, and I was trying to learn how to say brown. Red wasn't a problem, but brown was a problem. But anyway, so I like learning languages. But what I heard Dr. Jeffries, Vera Noble, Dr. Wade Noble's wife, say one time, is what we Africans do to the English language that is as important, if not more important, than the confines of the language itself. And what she and others since then have made a point about, and I think it's definitely something worthy of a conversation somewhere down the road, is the way in which we reinvent the language and make it work for us. So yes, there are concerns about us learning our language and coming back and which one do I learn and why, and okay, well, which one am I going to get to speak the most often? In other words, which one has the greatest utility? And then what does utility even mean? Because what if I just learn, as we were joking about last time, you'll remember some South African click language, right? And I'm just speaking it, okay, that's cool. Right. But I think that's the thing that began to, even though I like learning language and I'm not opposed to learning as many languages as I can, my personal goal is to learn 17 different languages. That's just my personal goal. But whether that happens or not, what I'm comforted about is what we Africans do to the English language. We add a different cadence to it. We change the pretext, we change the context, we change the endings of it. We add and subtract S's. You know, you would say to my mother, my back is itching. Mama, my back is itching. She says, well, itch on over there and bring me that cream so I can. I mean, we just reinvent the entire language to the point that it has me wondering if it's having the type of pejorative impact that we think it's having, or whether we're kind of like overreacting in our noble intentions of saying, let's learn our language. So I think there needs to be some conversation around that. When she was teaching the children English, she wasn't teaching them that kind of English, what we do the English. She was teaching them this very standard, stoic, sterile, linear, you know, put your concrete type of English. She wasn't teaching them that colorful stuff that we do to it. And I think had she done that, I personally might have kind of taken some interest to that. But, you know, I'm curious what you would have to say about not so much what English does to us, but over the decades, what we've done to English. I mean, we've just completely renovated it. As far as my experiences are concerned. And when you listen to people like Dr. King talk and his eloquence, and he's using English, I can assure you, him and like Toni Morrison, they're using English, and yet no fucking body talks like them on the planet. How do you take somebody else's language and like surpass them in it in ways that it's not even meant to use? So I would be interested to hear you weigh in on that. I mean, if you think everything I'm saying is nonsense, I'm okay, but I'd be interested to hear you weigh in on it.
That's interesting. There's a proverb in Chi that says, "Okramai on pedro pichen na."
Yeah, I got a dog.
Right? That dog is in there, so you do. It translates to the dog doesn't prefer bones to meat. It's just that that's all anyone will give to them, basically. And the idea is that, you know, like we had a bookstore called Blacknificent Books and More. Now there was no such thing as Blacknificent before, because built into the English language is the idea that everything black is bad and everything white is good. So we decided to come up with Blacknificent. Since then, Black Powerful, Blacktastic, Blackorific, Blackstounding, Blackstanding, and so forth and so on. And it also makes me think about what we do to the Chi language, because there was no discourse, you know, about African liberation when I started learning about Chi.
Okay.
You know, the context where I was learning Chi or hearing Chi, like I was on a bus coming from Kumasi back to Accra, someone got on the bus and started preaching about this imaginary white man in the sky who's going to save your soul. So if it's not in that religious brainwash context, then it would be, maybe you'll hear it on the news. So, you know, I came up with this idea, Abibi Tumi, Black Power, because nobody was talking about Black Power. So I said, well, we need to be talking about Black Power in our own languages. Abibi Fahudie, you know, Abibi Riase as the African world, so all these types of things. So if all you have is English to work with, then those are the building blocks that you work with. If you have other tools, then you can start doing things in other ways. So, you know, I would say that definitely we've done things to English. However, I would say more than our position, I would focus on our trajectory. Like, is that where we would like to remain? For those who would not like to remain there, then we can start looking at African languages. Because for me, the whole idea was, how come anytime we talk about African liberation, we always do it in English, French, Portuguese. I'm actually writing an article in Twi right now about teaching Medu Neter in Twi and other African languages. So the study group that we have, because we have Twi speakers, Wolof speakers, Yoruba speakers, when we have, that's who's in class, and that's all we teach in. And there are several benefits to that. One, it shows the correlations, words that we wouldn't even come across, but we come across them because we're using our indigenous languages. Right. So even when we're looking at Medu Neter, looking at a more revolutionary Medu Neter, so Kemetiu Mhat, black people in the front, as like a race-first type of concept. Now, I couldn't find any ancient text that was talking about Kemetiu and Mhat. So I said, well, therefore, I need to start doing something to the language in order to infuse it with this more revolutionary thing. And I think that's really what I got out of the second thing. No matter what you have, you can make it more revolutionary. But again, to me, I focus more on trajectory than position.
And what % of the English language is infused with other stuff? That was the other question.
Yeah, according to Oxford Dictionary, actually, let me look it up so I don't give you the wrong statistics, but it's a very high percentage.
Okay.
Yeah, and going to that question, I was once listening to a lecture by Dr. Ernie Smith on Ebonics. It's on YouTube. And then as a result of that, I was in the UK at the time. I then went to the British Library and I borrowed a whole bunch of books on Ebonics, Pidgin, Creole, all these kind of what would normally be called corruptions of English. And I learned a lot about actually how these things get, as you're saying, infused with style, philosophy, and everything of the speakers. So yeah, definitely. But I think the thing that would be important is, in addition to what Dr. Kambon was saying, is that we take pride in it and we own the narrative and what we're doing to it. So when somebody is saying that it's a corruption, we're quick to say, no, it's not, and these are the reasons why. And we take pride in it, not just allow it to be called slang and all these other kind of things that belittle it in our eyes or our tongues and others as well. And then lastly, the point I was going to make on this last documentary is the thing about music, the musical instruments, specifically the kora. It's funny, I think we're in a kind of a different sort of situation with the musical instruments than we are to our language. With our language, we think our languages can't evolve or adapt for modern use, and so we don't try. And then with our musical instruments, we know our musical instruments can be adapted for, to use the word again, modern use, but we don't, because of our history. We sort of have this fear of any kind of change of it would maybe speak to being Eurocentric or stuff like that. So we're in a kind of different kind of situation to that. So I think there's probably, some might say there is a right and a wrong on it, but especially because, funny enough, those who are leading on the so-called modernization of the kora and other things are actually European. That then adds whole other kind of mud to the water of the discussion. But that's something that, yeah, going back to the original point, I feel like there might never be a right or wrong to it, as far as analyzing for ourselves whether we should or shouldn't be adapting our instruments. We can ask ourselves, where would our instruments have been without colonization? What would the young generation of 500 years of Africans have taken the various instruments? Where would they be without colonization by now? Of course we can't know that, but surely with our languages we can know that, yes, we need to dust them off, see them as something that can be used practically, know that once we do start thinking of them as something that can be used in our mathematical discussions, in our political discussions, in our economical discussions, it wouldn't just be translations of English and French. We would be creating our own concepts, our own attitude, whole thinking paradigms to our progress and advancement that cannot exist in English and French and Spanish, because they just do not think like that. So once we have the freedom of our own thought in our own language, then we free ourselves from a lot of mental slavery, literally the bonds that the foreign languages place on us.
I was going to say 70% I got from dictionary.com to 60% In the vocabulary of sciences and technology, the figure rises to over 90%.
And this
About, yeah,
is 90%
of science and technology vocabulary. So about 60% of all English words have Greek or Latin roots.
okay.
In the vocabulary of sciences and intentionality, they're not saying, let me go and get God to do it. They're saying, my cousin's over there, that's what I'm going to choose. About 10% of the Latin vocabulary has found its way directly into English without an intermediary, usually French, because of the Norman invasion. Now, I also wanted to speak about, last year I had an article that came out on, it was entitled Non-African Linguists Be Like, This is a New Way to Quote, and basically dealing with how all these white linguists said that this idea of quoting using the word like started in 1980. So then I was like, I'm going, and you was like, oh no, you ain't. And I was like, I've been hearing this since,
Right.
Forever.
And then they was like, mm-hmm.
Right. So what myself and another colleague in the linguistics department, it was a co-authored paper, we actually went to some of the writings of Charles Chestnut, Paul Laurence Dunbar, the WPA narratives of formerly enslaved Africans, and all of them had quoting using like. Then I was like, Sally was a good girl. Then she started saying like this. So, basically you have, I was born in 79, all the way from 1980 up till last year, the consensus among linguists was that they just invented it with a White Valley Girl song in 1980. But what we were doing was also showing the word se is used to introduce quotes in chi. Now this word se can be used to introduce quotes. To use the word se, but then that same word se is used for to be like, to resemble. So just this idea of using the word for like in the sense of resemble and like to introduce a quote, just to show that one, we can go back into the 1800s and find this among black people there, and it didn't just pop out of the air. This is coming from the continent, or at least a parallel development, because the exact same type of construction. But basically just to the point of we're not speaking that bad or whatever, this was a point that was made up by, or come to by Lorenzo Dow Turner in Africanisms in the Gullah dialect, but he showed that previously they said we were speaking baby talk, where it came to, no, we invented language, and this is how language is supposed to be. However far away from that you are, is however far you are, but we invented it and we're keeping it as it was. So that was that. Also, there was another point that you brought up.
The instruments?
Yeah, one was about the instruments as well. The idea about, instruments, changing them, adapting them, and things like this. And it brought up this idea I was thinking about respecting things to death. And it came up from, there was a brother who told me he was studying the political economy of festivals. This is when I first started learning Yoruba. I said, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm learning Yoruba because I want to go into the political economy of festivals. But basically the idea that in a festival before the coming of Eurasians, every single thing in the festival would enrich the people around. So you have somebody who is going to tap the palm wine, who gets something from that. You get somebody who is going to carve the drum. You get somebody who's going to make the cloth. You get someone. So now we still do festivals, but that core principle of something that's enriching your own people has been lost. So we're still doing the dances, but if you look at every single thing from the schnapps to the wax print cloth to everything, there's absolutely no benefit internally. So basically the idea is that even when you change things, that there's a core idea of how does it benefit African people. So I could have changed this thing entirely. Matter of fact, like I'll give you an example. So this is one phone made by a Ghanaian named Kwesi Chum Ampofo, right? This is another phone, RLG, which went out of business, but I had this, I just got this other one. Now, to me, that is more African than pouring libation with schnapps. Because here we're talking about something that is enriching our own people, built by our own people. So, basically the question comes to what I'm talking about, respecting something to death. You hear people who will tell me, or I hear people, and And they say, oh, I can't wear that cloth because I can only wear it on a good occasion. But what I can wear every day is what just happens to enrich and finance my enemy. You understand? So out of respect, I can't do this except for one day on Christmas I'll wear this cloth. But every other day I can do things, you know, in another way. But basically, to get at the core, it's not about maintaining this exact thing the way it was, but if you can retain the essence of this is something that enriches, it comes from us, it benefits us in these particular ways. I think that's really the essence of what we're talking about being African, not, oh, I'm doing what was done 500 years ago. I'm doing it in the spirit in which things are benefiting African people, even though it may look vastly different.
You know, I agree with that, because I think about people like Ivan Van Sertima. I don't know if he ever learned a language, an African language, and we all know Ivan set it off. I don't know if Runoko Rashidi has ever or will ever learn a language, but we all know he's just setting it off. And the list, and we can just keep going down the list.
Thanks for coming. Hope to see you tomorrow. Bring 5 people on your back, front shoulders.
And I think that's the thing that encourages me, that when we look at then, and even the scholars and the heroes and sheroes that we have now, I don't know how people feel about Umar Johnson, but he doesn't strike me as one who's good on learning languages, and yet he's championed the cause in his own way for black folks by promoting a Pan-African United Front in his own way. And yet I've not heard him say one word, I think, in any other language, you know, except for Kemet or something like that, right? So it's not doing something to deaf, and recognizing that when it's all said and done, what are we doing that's moving us forward and helping us out? And when I think about Asa Hilliard, Asa was not totally, I knew him personally pretty well. He totally was not trying to learn some languages. And we all know that Asa Hilliard set it off up in here. Dr. Kiyobuseki Fukiao, I'm laughing because of his impersonation of Chinese people. It's just hilarious. But anyway, I didn't often see him wear African clothes. He lived in Boston. I don't know if it had something to do with the weather or whatever, but he just set it off everywhere he went. So, you know, this thing is complex and it's complicated, but at the end of the day, I really have to say that I'm impressed with what we do to the English language. And particularly, I'm happy that you mentioned what you came across in the enslaved African narratives and how they were using certain words, because when you go back through, you have me thinking about it now, when you go back through and rethink all of that, it's like, hold up. So they never, the vast majority of them never really were taught, never really took in English in its fullness. When you go back and think about it, you think about how our grandparents talk and the way, the words that they use and the stuff they said. I have these vivid memories where I saw their resistance, and they were like, I'm gonna say it this way. And I'm gonna say it this way because I want to. One of the words I remember in particular as an 11-year-old was the word sausage. I remember my grandmother was like, sausage, and I'm gonna say sausage because I wanna say sausage. And I'm not gonna say sausage. And there's these vivid memories of them saying, I'm going to reinvent this word. I'm going to reinvent how this sentence is said. I'm gonna change the order of the verb and the noun. You know, and I think that says something about what survives in us in the African survival thrust, and what we do to language, and the conversations that need to be had there, and not only what those languages do to us, the harm that they do us.
I also wrote an encyclopedia article that goes into various aspects of these commonalities between how African languages are structured syntactically, phonologically, phonologically, so forth and so on. The colleague who I worked on this recent article with, he also has a paper on various aspects. And basically what it comes down to is, you know, and this is even why, like, most people will refer to it as African American vernacular English. Me, I don't call it that. I call it anti-American African.
I like that.
Period.
I like it. I like it.
Because just that resistance you're talking about is that we're trying to not be swallowed up into this, you know, white pale death. So that's the anti-American and African, because you can see aspects of Wolof in there. You can see aspects of Ga in there. You can see aspects of Chi in there, of Yoruba in there, of Fulani, Pula, all these things. So when I say African, I mean not just one fragment of African, but everything possible. Kikongo is in there, you know, so forth and so on. I could go on ad infinitum, but it's anti-American on the one hand, but then it's African in the true sense of all instead of one.
And Doc, I'm sorry, you guys. This is really fascinating. I also add, in addition to what you're saying, Doc, think about the sounds. Let me say the quote unquote non-word sounds that we make, that we add and infuse to the English language. Like when we were coming up, right? We did this, you know. But you guys do it much longer and stronger, but ours is briefer. You know, it has a shorter thing. But coming up, if you did that, you got the fire slapped out of you because it had so much meaning. So then now there's not only how we use the word, but then there's these non-verbal sounds that we add into the language, and then that's not to mention exactly the rolling of the eyes, and then the inflection and the tone. I mean, we have done so much to alter the English language until it really, in my personal opinion, it's literally taken on a whole life of itself and become something entirely different. Now, that doesn't mean that we forego altogether learning our own languages, because I do believe that there's something that happens in the left and right hemisphere of the brain, and something that happens vibrationally to the fluid in the pineal gland when we tap into certain cadences and vibrational frequencies of certain types of languages. When I was learning Mandarin years ago, it had a different impact on my brain and how my brain felt than when I'm learning Tree, than when I'm learning Spanish, than when I'm learning German, than when I'm learning French, than when I'm learning Ewe. And I can feel the difference even at that elementary level, at that beginning level. And then I'm not mad about that. I'm just, you know, I can just feel the difference. And I was saying a couple of weeks ago on a program that I was on, that there was a brother who was saying that when he's arguing with his wife, they argue in English, but when he wants to calm her down, he speaks Fanti. When she wants to calm him down, he speaks Fanti. What is that saying? I mean, come on, you know. So it was as though, again, they used that, as you said, in a lesser way to express this volatile emotion, but when they want to get deep and recalibrate each other's vibrational frequency, they speak Fanti.
Any other? Because we'll probably freestyle back on the language freestyle.
Can we go?
Right. So, you know, I think that we've said quite a bit, you know, as a linguist, we'll just chit chat about language for a minute, but I'd like to thank everyone who came out today.
Thank you, Doc.
And I want everyone to bring 5, 10, 15, 20 people on your arms, on your shoulders, bring them on your head, on the plateau, however you need to do it. But I think these were very powerful films, and you know, more people should be able to do this. Every year the first day is kind of, you know, low, and then we get to standing room only, so you all are going to be part of making it standing room only, because the people who come on the first day always tell the rest of the campus, what was you doing? They say, oh, I was just twiddling my thumbs and cutting my toenails. I say, you should have been looking at all this blacktastic information. I don't know if anyone else thought that the Kora played by Tumani Jabate, I don't know if you know him, but if you don't know him, you need to know him. He has, actually along similar lines, a collaboration album with Taj Mahal, and it's amazing. Taj Mahal's playing the guitar, doing songs from the South, like you were here in the backwater somewhere. Wow. Then Tumani Jabate is playing the Kora. And you know, they're doing folk songs from the States, then they're doing folk songs from Mali. It's called Kulanjan. It's something to experience. Here, when he was playing, I was like, this is what the Kora is supposed to sound like. It put me into Mali. Yeah. I was there. Yeah. Some of the other ones, I was thinking, does anyone else think that this sounds as horrible as I do?
Yeah.
So, you know, they was doing whatever they were doing, but I was like, that's not it. Then they came back around eventually the two by now. I got that right frequency. calibrated once again to my pineal gland. But yeah, again, thank you all for coming out, Mesdames, Voici. Après nami, nay wala don barka. Yes, you.
Merci.